Hello and welcome to our Tuesday study in God's Word. Today we come to the letter E, which stands for actually two words, the expectation of excitement. The expectation of excitement. Let me ask you, on a weekly basis, how often are you on a mountaintop, literally on a mountaintop? Well, on a weekly basis, how many moments of genuine, terrific excitement do you have where you feel passionately about something and you're excited about it? Now, if you're a child, you can possibly have more of those than most adults because simple things are enough to put a child on a mountaintop. Years ago, our neighbors across the street got a new puppy, and they brought it out to the street, and all the neighbors were admiring the new puppy. And Mason, their son, looked up at his dad and said, "Oh, Dad, this is the best day of my life." He was on the mountaintop because he had gotten a new puppy. Well, let me ask you, do you expect to be on a mountaintop all the time in your relationship to God? Here's a problem that I actually see in Christianity. Many people talk about their faith like they are excited all the time. They project an image of how they are passionate about their relationship to God and feel and they project it like they have the emotion of excitement about spiritual things from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. Preachers are some of the worst at this. At times, preachers and Bible study teachers project an image like they live on a mountaintop all the time, and they inadvertently make their hearers begin to ask the question, "Well, what's wrong with me? Because I don't live on a mountaintop all the time. Why do I feel like a second-class citizen?" Let me give you some biblical advice. Words like passion and excitement, they're wonderful words, but they are used far too often in Christianity. Most of Christianity is not lived on a mountaintop. Most of the Christian life involves getting up and plodding. Yes, plodding, plodding along, obeying God, defeating temptation, dealing with the various challenges that we all face. Years ago, when I was about to go through the doctoral program to get my advanced degree in preaching and in New Testament, my advisor was a man named Dr. Chuck Kelly, who ended up becoming the president of New Orleans Seminary for like 20 years. And I'll never forget what he said. He sat me down before I started the doctoral program. He said, "Tommy, I know you're looking forward to working through this and getting that Doctor of Theology degree. But," he said, "I want you to know, I want to give you two words. Plodders win. Plodders win." In other words, the guys that just go to class and study and get a little bit done each day, they will eventually get to the mountaintop and receive that degree. He said, it's not going to occur overnight, but if you will just plod and do what you need to do, then you will get that. You will come out in 3 years with this degree. And when I thought about that, I thought about how that applies to our faith. I thought about Micah chapter 6, verses 6 through 8, where the prophet Micah asks, "With what shall I come to the Lord and bow myself before the God on high? Shall I come to him with burnt offerings, with yearling calves? Does the Lord take delight in thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I present my firstborn for my rebellious acts, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God?" The prophet Micah asks this dramatic question, What is God looking for from his people? Is he looking for glorious, dramatic offerings in worship, which places actually more the focus upon us than it does even on God? Is that what God wants? Is that the standard? Mountaintop, unparalleled worship experiences daily. And Micah answers the question. God is looking for the person who gets up, who cares about treating others with justice and in honesty, who literally loves expressing kindness and love to others, and who walks humbly with God, taking his commandments seriously, not looking down on other people, taking the role of a servant. Micah says that's what pleases God. And so then I ask you, well, why are so many people seemingly on an endless search for spiritual exhilaration? Well, part of it is because we all like to be on an emotional high. It's a pleasant experience. It's like eating fresh peach cobbler with homemade ice cream. The only problem is when we make spiritual exhilaration, when we make the mountaintop our main goal in life, we can actually lose sight of what God really expects. And we can very likely end up depressed since no one lives on the mountaintop all the time. You say, well, what about Paul? Well, think about Paul. Think about Peter. Think about Moses. Think about Mary. Think about Esther. Think about Ruth. Think about Joseph. Think about Abraham. None of them, of these great heroes of the faith, lived on a spiritual and emotional mountaintop all the time, constantly exhilarated in their faith. Joseph spent 12 years unjustly imprisoned. Elijah spent years battling Ahab and Jezebel. Ruth lost her husband, her brother-in-law, and her father-in-law, and had to struggle to survive until God gave her Boaz. So what made them special in God's eyes was not their spiritual exhilaration, but it was their long obedience in the same direction. And so here's a problem that I see in Christianity. Jesus defines being a Christian as dying to self and following him. Matthew 16:24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. But here's the problem. We define being a Christian in the year 2020 as being emotionally intimate with God so that we have this feeling of spiritual exhilaration all the time. And those are two very different definitions. The definition Jesus gives us of being a Christian is focused upon obedience that leads to Christ-likeness, which eventually leads to 1 Corinthians 13 love. The Apostle Paul would say, if our faith doesn't lead to 1 Corinthians 13 type love, then we've missed the boat entirely. The other definition of what it means to be a strong Christian is focused upon emotional exhilaration. And I would tell you that that's not an appropriate goal. Years ago, I read an interview with Dr. Eugene Peterson, and it's what he said in the interview was solid gold. And this is part of the interview. The interviewer asked, "What's the most misunderstood aspect of what it means to be a spiritual person?" He said, "Well, the most misunderstood aspect is that it's a kind of specialized form of being a Christian, that you have to be some type of expert in. Most people are attracted to it for the wrong reasons. Others are put off by it. Many people," then the interviewer said, many people assume that spirituality is about becoming emotionally intimate with God. And Eugene Peterson said, that's a naive view of spirituality. What we're talking about is the Christian life. It's following Jesus. Spirituality is no different from what we've been doing for 2,000 years. By just going to church, receiving the Lord's Supper, being baptized, learning to pray, and reading the scriptures correctly. It's just ordinary stuff. The promise of intimacy is both right and wrong. There's an intimacy with God, but it's like any other intimacy. It's part of the fabric of your life. In your marriage, you don't feel intimate most of the time, nor with a friend. Intimacy isn't primarily a mystical emotion. It's a way of life, a way of openness and honesty, a certain transparency. And then the interviewer says, well, doesn't the mystical tradition suggest otherwise? In other words, these famous Christians from years before who seemed to walk so closely with God. And Eugene Peterson answered and said, one of my favorite stories is of Teresa of Avila. Teresa of Avila, it was said of her that she was so close to God that sometimes when she prayed, she literally lifted off the ground. I mean, she was really close to God. And Eugene Peterson says, one of my favorite stories is of Teresa of Avila. She's sitting in a kitchen with a roasted chicken, and she's got it with both hands, and she's gnawing on it, just devouring this chicken. One of the nuns comes in, shocked that she's doing this, behaving this way. And Teresa of Avila said, when I eat chicken, I eat chicken. When I pray, I pray. And then Peterson says, if you read about the saints of old, they're pretty ordinary people. There are moments of rapture and ecstasy, but once every 10 years. And even then, it's a surprise to them. They didn't do anything. And then he says, we've got to disabuse people of these illusions of what the Christian life is. It's a wonderful life, but it's not wonderful in the way a lot of people want it to be. He said, I've been a pastor most of my life for some 45 years. I love doing this. But to tell you the truth, the people who give me the most distress are those who come asking, Pastor, how can I be spiritual? Forget about being spiritual. How about loving your husband? Now, that's a good place to start, but that's not what they're interested in. So you say, Brother Tommy, what's the point of this? The point of this is to steer us away from the idea that true spirituality and being truly spiritually mature is about being on a spiritual mountaintop all the time. You know what? If you're on a spiritual mountaintop all the time, you have nothing to give the rest of us, because none of the rest of us lives on an emotional mountaintop all the time or a spiritual mountaintop all the time. Years ago, I heard Amy Grant sing this song right after she began back in the 1980s. And the song goes, I love to sing and I love to pray, worship the Lord most every day. I go to the temple and I just want to stay, to hide from the hustle of the world and its ways. And I love to live on a mountaintop, fellowshipping with the Lord. I love to live on a mountaintop because I love to feel my spirit soar. But I've got to come down from the mountaintop to the people in the valley below, or they'll never know that they can go to the mountain of the Lord. Today, I would encourage you to live a life of obedience, walking with God. Thank God for the spiritual mountaintops that you have, but don't make an idol out of the mountaintops. What God is looking for is obedience and love and a servant spirit. He's not looking for a person who has warm fuzzies all the time spiritually. God bless you, and thank you for studying with me today.